This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman, from the Epic Times. And now let's begin today's discussion by talking about Pfizer. And to start with, just yesterday, Pfizer's CEO, he came out during an interview on CNBC, and he announced that he will be asking the federal regulators in this country to authorize a second booster dose of their COVID vaccine, meaning that he will be seeking authorization for a fourth shot due to the waning effectiveness of what's already available. Here's specifically what he said during that interview just yesterday. Quote, "Clearly, there is a need in an environment of Omicron to boost the immune response." And indeed, his comments, they underlie what we've been seeing for the past year or so. Because when the Delta strain of the virus became the predominant strain in this country, well, the efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine, in terms of both protecting against infection as well as against hospitalization, it began to precipitously wane. And this issue became only more pronounced when Omicron, it replaced Delta as the dominant strain here in America sometime late last year. Here's specifically what the Pfizer CEO said on this point. Quote, "Waning immune responses are higher for people if they have high age, they are older, or they have underlying conditions. But the immune responses are waning for all people." And again, according to publicly available data, it looks like he is indeed correct. In fact, according to several studies, we've covered many of them on the show, including one large study from the CDC themselves, they show that the protection from vaccines against severe disease drops precipitously over time. And then additionally, depending on which study you're looking at, the data also shows that the vaccines provide either little or even no protection against infection from Omicron. Again, different studies show different numbers, but the overall conclusion is that the Omicron variant can easily bypass any supposed protection that was once offered by the vaccines, which is exactly why now the CEO of Pfizer will be going over to the federal regulators in order to try to get a fourth shot approved, which actually then brings us neatly along to the main topic that I wanted to discuss with you today. And that is, after months and months and months of waiting, after months of legal back and forth, well, the Pfizer documents are finally beginning to get released into the public sphere. Now, to give you a bit of background, you might remember how late last year, a group called the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency, they filed a lawsuit against the FDA in order to force them to release all of the documents that are in their possession that pertain to the Pfizer vaccine's approval. Specifically, they were looking to get access to the 33,000 pages of data which Pfizer submitted to the FDA in order to get emergency use authorization and then later full approval of their COVID vaccine. Now, of course, the FDA tried to slow walk the process. They said that they needed to take 55 full years to release all the documents. But as we have reported earlier, the judge in the case, he disagreed and he forced the FDA to release all their documents at an accelerated pace so that the public can have access to them all by the end of this year. And for your reference, here is the schedule of release that they now have to follow. On March the 1st, the FDA released 10,000 pages of documents, which are now publicly available. Then on April 1st, they'll have to release another 10,000 pages. Then on May 1st, June 1st, and July 1st, they'll have to release 80,000 pages on each of those dates. Then on August 1st, they'll have to release 70,000 pages. And then subsequently, following August, they will have to release 55,000 pages on the first business day of each month until all the documents are released. Now, one very important thing to mention here is that the court order, which forced the FDA to release these documents at an accelerated pace, it did not mention the order in which the documents have to be released. And so perhaps if they exist, the most damning documents might be pushed back later into the schedule. We'll just have to wait and see. Regardless, though, what this schedule actually means in practice is that as of this moment, me and you, meaning the public, we now have access to the first 10,000 pages of Pfizer documents. And if you're interested in checking them out for yourself, you can find them over on the official website for the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency group. All you have to do is scroll down a little bit and then click on the button that says Pfizer's documents, and then you can go through them one by one, download them onto your computer, and scan through them for yourself. Now, in terms of what these newly released documents actually show, well, there's one batch that has the collected adverse reactions that people experienced during the first 3-month period shortly after the Pfizer vaccine began to be marketed to the public. Specifically, during the 3-month period between December 1st of 2020 and February 28th of 2021. This was the period when the vaccine was available under emergency use authorization, and it was the first time that people at large had access to it. And according to these documents, during that time period, meaning during that 3-month time period, here's what the data showed. To start with, there were 1,223 fatalities that were associated with the vaccine. Although, just to pause here for a quick moment, it's worth mentioning that none of these 1,223 fatalities have been verified to be directly related to the vaccine. But whoever reported it to the system likely believed that it was, and that's why it's mentioned in this report. So take that for what you will. Then moving on, there were 42,086 case reports, which contained within them a total of 158,893 adverse events, which were associated with the vaccine, meaning that the average person who was listed in that case report experienced something like 3 or 4 different adverse reactions. That's why those numbers are like that. And then furthermore, it's worth noting that this data was accumulated from the U.S. government's VAERS system, from reports that were submitted directly to Pfizer, as well as from reports that were submitted to the equivalent systems in other countries. However, and this is something that the documents themselves mention, because these adverse reaction reports are submitted voluntarily, it's not exactly clear what percentage of adverse reactions are underreported, meaning that the real number could be anywhere from 5% to even 500% higher, which is have no idea. Regardless, though, let's continue digging in through the data together. Most of these adverse reactions were reported in the United States, standing at about 13,739. Then in terms of other countries, you had the United Kingdom with 13,404 adverse cases, Italy with 2,578, Germany with 1,913, France with 1,506, Portugal with 866, Spain with 756, and then the remaining 7,324 adverse case reports, they were distributed among 56 other countries. And then in terms of what these adverse reactions actually look like, meaning what symptoms the people actually experienced, well, these documents present a bit of a breakdown. And so in terms of the more common reactions, here's what the documents show. General disorders and administrative site conditions accounted for 51,335 adverse events. Nervous system disorders accounted for 25,957. Musculoskeletal and connective tissue disorders accounted for 17,283 adverse events. Gastrointestinal disorders accounted for about 14,096 adverse events. Skin and subcutaneous tissue disorders accounted for 8,760 adverse events. Respiratory, thoracic, and mediastinal disorders accounted for 8,848 adverse events. Infection and infestations accounted for 4,610 adverse events. Injuries, poisoning, and procedural complications accounted for 5,590 adverse events. And then when you go a bit further down into the documents, they list something that they call cardiovascular adverse events of special interest. And of these, the documents show that in the first 3 months of the injections, there were 1,403, 241 of which were medically confirmed, and 1,162 which were not medically confirmed. And by the way, if you'd like to dig deeper into what any of those specific conditions were, you can look at the tables in the documents, which have a actually pretty great breakdown of the different symptoms and what percentage each of those symptoms represent. Also, there is something else that's worth noting, which is that if you continue to go down in these documents, they have another section which doesn't have percentages, but all it does is that it has page after page of an appendix which includes the adverse events of special interest. And in that list, there are many, many different conditions, including hemorrhages, even things like herpes, and different syndromes, which are associated with a period of time shortly after people were administered the vaccine. Now, again, just because something is present on that long list does not mean necessarily that it is an adverse reaction that came from the vaccines. It's very likely just something that the researchers noted to look out for, maybe because they saw 1 or 2 cases pop up. Regardless, though, the next logical question to ask is what percentage of the vaccines that were distributed do these numbers represent? Because you can look at this data and you can say, wow, 42,000 cases of adverse reactions is huge. But what is the percentage? What is the denominator to look out for here? And this is where things get a little weird. Because if you look at the document, what's this? Well, that's a great question, Roman, and it is today's sponsor, which is an awesome messaging and email service provider called Secure. And it's awesome if you're the type of person that actually cares about their privacy. Because, I mean, it's no big secret that these big tech companies are mining and remining our data all the time. In fact, in the year 2020, it was found that over 155 million Americans, likely including you and me, have suffered some form of data breach. And by the way, that's only what's publicly known. However, what's happened in the past, well, that can stay in the past because with Secure, your data and your messages can remain private. And that's because Secure has all of their data centers located over in Switzerland rather than in the US or in China. And the reason that's so important is that Switzerland has some of the strictest data privacy laws in the entire world, and they are not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. And if you want to know what the Cloud Act is, head on over to secure.com and watch their video on the homepage or on the video tutorials page, which is under their support section. Now, the thing that I personally love the most about the Secure app is the privacy aspect of it. They don't mine my data. They don't mine my phone number. They don't mine the phone numbers or data of my friends and family who I chat with. But best of all is that if your friends and family don't actually use the Secure app themselves, it doesn't matter. Because the way that it works is that when you use their Secure Send email technology, all of your emails and your messages route to Switzerland, and then the recipient can reply using their secure reply technology, and so everything remains private no matter what. And the same actually goes for their messaging app as well. And they're always coming up with new features. In fact, the most recent one they told me about, they sent me an email here, was that they're coming up with a new feature called text to chat by invite. So they're an innovative company, and they really do care about your privacy. And so what they're doing doesn't work with your existing big tech email account. So check them out. You can head on over to secure.com. I'll throw the link into the description box below. And when you use promo code Roman, you can get 25% off. And the rates are not even that expensive to start with, by the way. It's only $5 for the messenger and $10 for the email and messenger combo. And they even offer a 7-day free trial. So head on over to their website. Again, it'll be linked in the description box below. Use promo code Roman to save some money. And now, Roman in the studio, back to you. But what is the percentage? What is the denominator to look out for here? And this is where things get a little weird. Because if you look at the document, specifically at section 3.1.1, which is called General Overview, it says, quote, "It is estimated that approximately blank doses of Pfizer vaccine were shipped worldwide during this 3-month period." And notice there that the actual number of vaccines that were shipped out during this 3-month period is redacted. For some reason, either Pfizer or the people over at the FDA, they decided to redact this information, making it difficult to figure out what the percentages are for both the associated deaths as well as for the associated adverse events. However, even though the data is redacted, there is a proxy that we can use by looking at the publicly available data on vaccinations. I'll throw it up on screen for you. So what you're looking at there is a chart from ourworldindata.org. It's a great website. And this chart, it shows the number of vaccine doses that were administered in the U.S. between December 1st of 2020 and February 28th of 2021. Basically, the exact period coinciding with these Pfizer documents. And then also, besides the U.S. chart, you can look at data from other countries as well. For instance, the countries over in the European Union, Australia, etc. Then, if you add up all the countries that were listed in these Pfizer documents, you come to a figure of approximately 80 million vaccine doses that were administered in that 3-month period. Now, here's where it gets a little dicey, because in order to gauge how many people that actually represents, it's a little bit unclear, because you have 80 million vaccine doses, but how many people actually receive those doses? Because we know that the Pfizer vaccine needs to be given in a 2-dose regimen that are 21 days apart. However, how many people actually got the 2-dose regimen in that 3-month time span? Regardless, though, let's assume that that's exactly what happened. And so these 80 million vaccine shots were given to, let's say, approximately 55 million people. Now, that number, again, is not exact, but it accounts for people generally receiving 2 doses between December and January, and then everybody who received a dose in February only received 1 dose because they didn't have enough time for the 2nd dose. And so total, let's just estimate 55 million people. So that when you divide the number of case reports that we saw in the document, which is again 42,086, by 55 million, which is the number, at least an estimated number of how many people received the vaccine by that point in time, well, you get a ratio of about 1 in 1,300, meaning that according to this rough calculation, and again, just for your reference, it has to be rough because for some reason the Pfizer documents were redacted on this point. Regardless, though, what it means is that 1 out of 1,300 people experience some form of adverse reaction. And again, as I mentioned earlier, every one of those people, on average, experience between 3 and 4 different types of adverse reactions. Now, again, there are 2 things worth mentioning, at least in my view. The first thing is that these adverse reactions are associated with the vaccine. There's no definitive proof that they are caused by the vaccine. They are just associated with the vaccine as listed in the research. And then the second thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, this data comes from voluntary reporting from things like the VAERS system, as well as reports which were sent over to Pfizer themselves. And so even in these documents' own admission, there is likely heavy underreporting. So as to what the real data is, we don't know. Regardless, at the very least, we have some of this data in hand, and more of it will be coming on the way as more and more of these documents get released in the coming months. Until then, let's head on back to the studio. If you'd like to read more about these Pfizer documents, I'll throw links to both the documents themselves as well as to an analysis of them into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a super quick moment to smash that like button so the YouTube algorithm will share this video out to ever more people, letting the truth be known far